Forecasting the future has been the theme of this conference. And it's important to remember with the chaos of our daily lives that what we actually do today can direct where our future is in the future. So to discuss the future again, but also from a unique perspective, I'm going to bring up our traditional Fireside Chat panel that will be led by our founding donor, Bill Coleman, Chief Executive Officer at Veritas Technologies, and has been in the field for 25 years in Silicon Valley, directing some of these amazing technologies. So with that, I'm going to hand it over.
Thank you.
I don't know whether to be flattered or not, but I've only been in the field for 25 years. I think 25 years was when I became a CEO, so I've been in the field a lot longer than that. You've met Clayton. Clayton has been involved with the Institute since before it was the Institute, since it was the Coleman Initiative back in 1999. Peter's been involved for 12 years, something?
Yeah.
Helping us with some of the original ideas that led to the Declaration and how we could make it work, bring it together, and now start to build and now continue to build its acceptance. I thought that we could have each reflect a little bit on our thoughts from what we took away from today. I'll do it from a futurist point of view for what it's going to mean for people with cognitive disabilities. Clayton will reflect on technology support that, and Peter on the societal, legal aspects. And then we'll just have a little discussion, maybe have time for a couple of questions. First thing this morning, talking about the Internet of Skills, the whole sensory aspect of it, makes me reflect on, the history of computer science has been to continue to move up levels of abstraction. And with the internet, now the edges are in charge. You heard about the edges earlier. It's anything, anyone can communicate with any combination of anything to anywhere. And that's where the Internet of Things is going to come in. It's going to give us a lot more control of our life. We hear a lot about machine learning, artificial intelligence, et cetera. Last week I had dinner with a professor of mine from Stanford. That was many years ago. But his name's Professor Ed Figgenbaum. He's still one of the leaders in the field of artificial intelligence. But he's co-inventor of artificial intelligence back in the middle 60s. And he pulled out his tablet after dinner and he started drawing the spectrum from perspective, being able to see and understand and figure out that's a cat and that's a dog, all the way to total cognition. And it's a long road and we're moving along the way, but we aren't all the way there. Then we started talking about what really does it mean for human beings. And it reminded me of a session I had about 3 weeks ago in London with Professor Rob Wolcott, who is a futurist from Kellogg, the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern. And what he said is, and he's written a little pamphlet on this, which is really, really interesting. We've come through the whole history of humanity in a history of scarcity, and where everything is opaque, where you really can't get all the information you need. And where we're going is just the opposite. It's a period of abundance. And if you look ahead with the productivity curves, et cetera, and transparency. So now, what does this all mean? So it means that, number one, things like the access to the internet and the cost of the internet, et cetera, as more and more people get on it, are going to drop through the floor. And we're going to be able to see any piece of information out there. Now, we have security problems, et cetera, but that got in a discussion I had with both of them. It's not artificial intelligence. We're not going to the world that you hear some of the scare tactics. Artificial intelligence is going to take down humanity. It's not the scary movies. You know, you go to science fiction movies and half of them, the future is dark and horrible. The entire future of mankind has been up and to the right, or else we all still be living in caves, you know, and hunting with rocks and stones. The reality is it's augmented intelligence. So I think about 10 years ago, I talked about my theories of the cycles of innovation, and it takes us to this, my final one I call transparency. That's when you have access and you can actually access and use that information. And with the Internet of Things, what does that mean? Well, with augmented intelligence, it really is what Claudia and I's vision of this institute was 20 years ago, to be able to give people a prothesis for life. With, you know, machine learning is not about the machines learning, it's about the software learning how to anticipate what things are happening, how you're going to react, how the world will interact with you. And when think about this with the Internet of Things, you know, you no longer have to learn how to interact with the world will interact with you. What was that going to mean? I mean, I truly believe before 20 years from now, if you wish to, you'll be able to be neurally connected to the internet. So what are machines good for? Computers good for? They're good for parsing through massive, massive amounts of information and understanding that information and running algorithms to get results. They aren't good at perceiving what you like and dislike, but with machine learning, they can anticipate, they can learn, and they can adapt to you. They can literally allow the world to adapt to you. They understand what your strengths and weaknesses are. I really don't like taking those medicines in the morning, but once, in that kind of a world, machine learning will learn how best to support those kind of things, to interact with you. Transportation will go away. I mean, yes, self-driverless cars, but who cares what mode of transportation you're taking, it will all be able to be adapted to you. I have to be someplace at some time to be at work. Well, what are the three modes of transportation? What's the easiest? How do I interact with that environment? It's all tapped in reality. This really is the prothesis for life, and I believe that this whole idea of augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence, is where machine and man will come together in a symbiotic way developing over the next number of decades. And that'll be supported by technology. So I don't know if you're ready to take it from there, Clayton, but...
Well, I'll take it. I don't know if I'll take it from there or not. So a couple of kinds of comments. One on the up and to the right thing. Some of you in the audience know Nancy Ward, a prominent self-advocate who's worked with us over the years. And one of Nancy's persistent requests has been when she's reading something and there's an unfamiliar word, she'd like it to be really easy to get a definition. Well, that's true now. It's not true everywhere, but it's true a lot of places, and it could be true anywhere. That's just an example of how advances in technology are meeting some of the needs that we have today. I'm sure you're all hearing about progress in machine learning, as Bill pointed to there. There's been a real step there. It's interesting that my colleagues who do this work for a living tell me that, this is not about new ideas. It's about the more successful implementation of ideas that have been around since the 80s, where the missing ingredients were sufficiently fast processors and sufficiently large quantities of data and the technical wherewithal to manipulate them. With those capabilities, again, the ideas from the 80s are now doing things which I remember when I was a graduate student were taken as the outer limit of what might someday be possible. So some of you followed already a few years ago now the success of Google Alpha in playing the board game Go at the very highest level. You'll remember in an earlier generation, people were impressed that we had machines able to beat human chess champions. But even when that was being done, people were thinking, well, but Go is just way harder than that. Well, now even playing Go has been accomplished, but it's been done in an interesting way that I think has wider implications. So when IBM's Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, it wasn't hard for anyone to say how it was that that had been done. When AlphaGo won its championship match, even skilled Go analysts could not say how it had done that. And that's an interesting feature, sort of a sidelight on the technology that Bill is pointing to, these machines that program themselves. When we program them, we know what we did. When they program themselves, we don't always know what they did. I have a colleague who's working on an emergent technological challenge, which arises if you're working with a robot that has trained itself using machine learning. It's very important if you're working with a robot to have some idea of what it's going to do and what it's not going to do. If you want to instruct it, you need to know, well, why didn't it do the thing that I thought it would do, and so on. So Brad Hayes is a colleague's name who's solving that problem through the application of machine learning as well. So he has a robot that's observing the first robot and learning to explain what the first robot does. So the human being doesn't have to do the work of figuring it out. It can ask this other robot, so why did it do that? And the other robot has been monitoring what the first robot has been doing for a long time, so it will say, well, it's obvious, it's obvious to me that when such and such a circumstance happens, those are the conditions under which that happens. This, I think, opens the way to some possibilities of interest to us in a couple of ways. One, if we have the prostheses assisting us, it's important that we have some notion, perhaps, of how they work. So there's interesting progress there. But I think there are also interesting possibilities in what happens when these devices are able to observe us. So this is maybe just filling in a sketch of the technology behind part of what Bill was talking about. So if I want to have a system that's going to help me effectively, probably a part of that, as Bill is suggesting, is it needs to have a model of me. And how could it do that? Well, the answer, there is progress being made using machine learning techniques, as Bill is suggesting, to get it so that there could be something which comes to know my habits, what I'm likely to be trying to do under particular circumstances, perhaps having a sense of when I might have difficulty doing something, and so on. I want to make another allusion, actually, to the last session, Kathy Bodine's very interesting presentation, and just mark that part of the message that I got, anyway, from Kathy is a reminder that what we're concerned with together here is by no means just technology in the narrow sense. It's fundamentally a combination of technology and psychology. That's really what I take it that Kathy is pointing to there. And to take another step along that line and relating to what Bill is talking about, the very exciting work we heard about in the opening plenary still was respecting a kind of traditional boundary between us and what's in here and what's out there. So we can have better sensors that are telling us more about what's out there, but it's still out there. I think if we really pursue Bill's idea of the prosthesis for self, we need to seek a way to break down that barrier between what's out there and what's in here, to break down the boundaries of the self, and to get it so that I don't have the sense that I'm being just assisted by something, and certainly not directed by something, but rather have the sense that I'm an independent person, as we all want to be, and that my capabilities have been augmented, but in the sense that it's really me whose capabilities have been augmented. The psychology of this, I think we don't understand very well, but we can point, well, I know we don't understand them very well, but we can point to some things which we do know happen, which suggest maybe where things may go. So in the motor domain, maybe you've all had the experience that if you work a lot with a tool, in the beginning, you're very aware you're using this tool, but when you become very familiar with it, or a musical instrument might be a better example for some people, there's a sense in which the tool or the instrument just becomes part of you. You don't think of it as being something out there that you're controlling. It's something that's just part of how you do things. I don't know of cases in which something that we are thinking comes to have the same character, that some augmentation, picking up Bill's point about augmented intelligence, some augmentation becomes integrated into our sense of ourselves. But I think we can project that that's something which perhaps will happen as these technologies develop.
Peter.
Always fascinating to listen to these two guys. I'm a lawyer and a social scientist, and I am always struck by how much I learn from coming to this conference and put into action into law and policy with my colleagues. Bill said that, if I quoted him right, technology is increasing levels of abstraction, or they're increasing levels of abstraction. Well, of course, lawyers, the whole goal of lawyers is to reduce levels of abstraction, to have concrete, case-specific outcomes. And the point I always take away is the amazing technological information I learn and try to contribute to is operating in this very dynamic legal and regulatory environment in a very symbiotic way. Privacy and security is the forefront of that. But the things we talk about here have real and direct impact in the cases that I'm involved with: decision-making, interaction with technology, and so forth. And Colorado recently has been much on my mind. Perhaps the two most, at least in my area, important cases, certainly one in the last 35 years. One was Andrew F., which was the United States Supreme Court case last year, 2017, I think, written by the Chief Justice, an 8-0 decision. One of the justices, I think Kagan, recused herself, which was probably the most important idea, free and appropriate public education case since Rowley. I think that's 35 years ago, which basically said, this case said that a de minimis standard in teaching kids with disabilities is not enough. We have to have, according to the statute, a sufficiently ambitious program to teach our kids with disabilities in the public schools. The parents won. What does that mean for me? It means I go to schools now and talk about the Declaration. I go to schools now and talk about a technology plan as part of the IEP and everything the Coleman Institute is doing. And that's a real advancement for those of you in this educational area. In an otherwise fairly bleak time, that case holds great promise. It empowers parents, and it, of course, sets higher expectations, whether that will be fulfilled through technology or otherwise. Colorado is also very much on my mind because you happen to have a master cake maker not too far from here who's the subject of a Supreme Court case right now about 30 miles north of the Douglas County School District where Andrew F. was decided, which was very positive. Without going into that, one of the most important cases presently pending before the United States Supreme Court is essentially whether or not a commercial entity, a baker in this case, can refuse to make a cake in a customized way for a gay couple because it's in opposition to his religious beliefs, the so-called religious exemption. But more importantly, where I think the court will go, it's in opposition to his free speech rights. Now, so it's a very hard case on a number of dimensions. A couple of years ago, I told you about a case I was involved with called the Greater Los Angeles Association of the Deaf versus CNN. And CNN basically took the position, remember, that if they had to caption their website, make this accommodation technologically, coming to technology, it would abridge, it would limit their free speech rights as a news organization. In other words, as perversely as it sounds, by by forcing them under the ADA to caption, they are somehow speaking in a different way than they otherwise would be, that they otherwise would choose to speak. Now, fortunately, we settled that case. We did win on the constitutional First Amendment issue before the Ninth Circuit. In other words, captioning was not the captioning itself was not necessarily a violation of their free speech rights. But we're now looking at video description, new forms of interactive technology, which you're talking about, which are going to affect arguably the nature of the way the content is presented. Even Kathy's extraordinarily important research with regard to one size fits one, with regard to customizing iPads, which may be just maybe a software issue. But nonetheless, there may be issues there with regard to the owner of the content or the owner of the information arguing that they are being asked to speak in a way that they choose not to speak. The reason why I raise these cases, these two ones right within 50 miles of here, and the Master Cake case to be argued very shortly, coming off of the case, of course, the seminal Supreme Court case, which said that lesbian gay marriage, of course, was constitutional, is that we can't get away from this involving relationship between technology, and Bill and Clayton have said, and attitudes in the community about how people believe they own or experience what they own. For example, the religious exemption, as strange as it sounds, as relevant to technology, the religious exemption is basically if this cake maker had to write something biblical or otherwise on the cake. These are customized cakes. Mind you, he had no objection to them buying a regular cake, a non-customized cake from his bakery. A little bit of lawyering going on there. But if he in any way had to speak in regard to this cake or this technology or whatever issue you're talking about, the court potentially could carve out an exemption to civil rights laws. We heard about accessibility, the ADA under threat today, on the basis of these individual preferences. And of course, the real question is, where do those preferences end? And it harkens back, of course, to the seminal cases in the racial area, where the stores in the South didn't want to serve black customers because they felt it would harm their business, or even because they felt it was against their religion. Who knows? And so this is kind of the complex legal environment we're operating in. I hope I didn't get too far afield, but I wanted to stress that for every action here, there is a action, and we're in a legal and regulatory environment now which is quite different than many of us have ever been used to being engaged in. And the rate at which this technology is allowed to flourish hopefully will not be inhibited by restrictions, unnecessary restrictions in law and policy, but that's to be played out in the conference. Next year, we'll be talking about the outcome in the Master Cake Baker case, and we'll see the implications of that. Actually, I'm going to start working on a paper on that. The implications of the Master Bake Caker case for accommodations for people with disabilities. So that's my 2 cents coming down on the abstraction level. And as I say, I always learn extraordinary things from you guys and everybody in this audience, and it's a great pleasure to be here, Bill, and a great honor.
You know, trying to tie these things together, I go back to my levels of abstraction. From a human point of view, you know, we started out interacting very technically with programs, and that era began to come to an end in the 90s, that when we could start interacting across the network with other people. I call that free reach. I mean, you call it the social network. And that brought to it a whole nother level of security, insecurity on the one hand, and on the other hand, the ability to create whole new worlds like Airbnb and Uber and those kind of things. What we heard about this morning about the Internet of Skills, we're taking up to another level where now we can tactically and interactively interact. These are all different kinds of levels of abstraction. When you think about virtual reality and you put things like the Internet of Skills together, you're going to be able to abstract time and space. I mean, space, obviously, because I can be operating from 1,000 miles away. Time, because the student can step right into your gloves and learn how you operated. But now we're going to take it to that last level, which is the one I was talking about, and where we can be neurally connected, and all those other things come together with the Internet of Things. The mind goes crazy. What is education when all information, facts, and calculations can be available to you just for asking? You know, what do you learn and how do you learn? Concepts, values, models, the ability to, how do you engage across that kind of a thing? I think Clayton hit on something that it sort of relates to an old saying, technology is something that was invented after you were born, we don't think of a fork as technology. We don't think of a car as technology, but they're just augmenting you. And, when he was talking about, I don't know how this would work cognitively, I was thinking, when I first saw a GPS system in a car, it was 1998, and I'm a software engineer. I'm going, how did they do this, right? But now, I just get in the car and say, take me to True Foods in Palo Alto, and the car starts directing you. The watch is hitting me on the wrist. I turn left there. I mean, what's the difference between that and now having the next level of connection? I actually think 50 years from now, that the level of things I'm talking about are going to be possible, and we really will have the ability to interact, and in where whatever your gifts are can be compounded and extended in every possible way, and you can interact and be productive human being that where the people you interact with may not even contemplate that there are some areas that you aren't as gifted as they are. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm not saying this right, but I really think we have an opportunity here. And there's going to be a lot of challenges related to where security across the network becomes even more, could become even more exposed. I personally believe the technology will solve that problem. The first key is true identity. And when you can really be on the network, and the network can, through a machine learning way, can absolutely guarantee that only you can be you, then almost everything about cybersecurity will be solved. But that's not here yet. You have any closing thoughts, Clayton?
Well, you just flooded my mind by bringing up the identity thing and all the associations there.
We've had a lot of work on identity, he and I, over the last decade.
Yeah, but actually, I'd be interested in what you think about the state of that. I've been disappointed that there've been, as some people in the room know, I mean, big initiatives trying to coordinate, a lot of effort on that, but I don't have the sense that much has happened there. It seems like it's a very hard problem, and it's hard to know whether it's a hard problem technically or from a social and policy point of view, probably both, actually. But how optimistic are you at this point on that?
I think it's going to take longer than I had hoped. As it turns out, there's fundamental technology with the spread of being able to identify everything in the internet where we can address that. We thought we were closing in on that 6 or 7 years ago. Yeah. The problem is the infrastructure and everything that's built into every way people interact today and the security on the internet, et cetera, it's a paradigm shift. And I think it's going to take time. My hope is this: as we move forward, and the kinds of capabilities I talked about, we're not going to be able to do it without some form of your identity being captured in information. That's machine learning. What's it doing? It's learning about the forms of your identity, how you interact with society, who you are, what you like and dislike. To do that, we're going to have to be able to really address the identity problem. These, we talked about some of these things have been available 50 years ago. He talked about this morning, the video phone, right? Well, it's not available until it becomes such a huge economic leverage that it's solved in a general basis. I believe this whole where machine learning, artificial intelligence meets the future is going to happen and begin happening in the next 10 years, because there's an absolute phenomenal race going on in business to be able to do what's called digital transformation. And that's to be able to take every piece of information they can get about you and about everything that's going on in the rest of the world and give you a better solution, a better problem, a better financial thing than anybody else can in real time. And why is everybody racing to that? Because as soon as the first bank figures that out and starts taking market share from the other banks, it's just going to go crazy. And unless you're in the middle of this information technology thing, you don't realize how much money's being spent. And that's what actually drives stuff into everything we do and then builds that basis that we can build on. We weren't going to ever get to video phones the way I saw my first video phone in the New York World's Fair in 1964. That would have never made it. But now all these other technologies come together, and we think of what happens when we look in our phone and talk and do FaceTime as just one of those things, just happens.
The non-abstract lawyer is thinking, what is he going to do when the clients ask, how much should I be paid for lending my neural network to somebody else?
That's already a problem we're thinking about. Well, it's not the neural network, but everything I know about me and my back, and how can all that knowledge be used combined with my DNA in certain circumstances for what medicines I'm taking to better diagnose X, Y, Z. And should I be paid for that?
Yeah. Who's going to own it?
Yeah.
Who's going to have access to it?
I think we've run out of time. This thing's flashing red. Oh, it's just gone off. Oh, we're dead. I want to thank everybody, and I'd like everybody to thank Shay and the team that put this on.
Do we take any questions?
If we can't, but we're out of time. We're keeping them for the cocktails.
Oh, yeah. God forbid.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Bill. Thank you to the wonderful panel. It's always inspiring to hear what you have to say at the Fireside Chat. Well, it's my job to close out the conference. I hope you have all had a wonderful day. I have to do some thank yous to a wonderful team and some wonderful people who helped us make this possible. I want to thank Microsoft. We did an amazing event yesterday that was about bringing this community to industry, and I want to thank them for that opportunity to do that. I want to thank, of course, our staff, the Coleman Institute staff, Genevieve Berry, Jennifer Kraft, Joy Wu, Rick Hemp, Amy Lewinsky, and then, of course, thank David Braddock for his leadership in 17 years. I also want to thank ATP, Kathy's shop, who has been wonderful and helped us do this amazing conference and do the registration. Their team has been miraculous, so thank you. And, of course, the Coleman and Turner family for your inspiration and the opportunity for which we would not be able to put on this conference without you. I was really fortunate to be a student of Dr. Shane Lopez, who is the world leader, one of the world leaders in hope. And so I want to leave you with something that he said, and it's the tiny ripple of hope that you set in motion can change the path of someone's life. I hope that you can take this conference as a ripple and move it forward. So thank you for coming, and we hope to see you next year on October 3rd. So thank you.